Welcome to Rauta. This time it's not a video about happy places and great music, views, news and all that stuff, but some grave news about some people in the metal scene dead, unfortunately, of too young age and all that stuff, but life is what it is, and this time it gave us some sour lemons. Mostly, I guess, recently been in the news that Tomas Lindberg of At the Gates and other bands have unfortunately passed away in the age of 52. And obviously, this was to be expected, unfortunately so, at some point, but maybe it got us a little bit like by surprise, because when there was news coming out about his severe illness, it wasn't too long time ago then there was this announcement that certain gigs couldn't be done and all that other stuff related to recording a new album and all that stuff. And this time, unfortunately, it is rest in peace time for him. But obviously, these past few weeks, including August especially, has been a bunch of news related to a lot of musicians, ceased. And that is very, very unfortunate. This seems like so unfair to see people relatively young even to die of various reasons. Some go by their own hands, suicide and all. Some because of illness, and that's life, unfortunately. But I wanted to dedicate this particular episode to Tomas Lindberg because obviously he was in a way a hero for me because of At the Gates and all. After all, At the Gates was a very important band with just maybe a few albums, not the whole discography, but seen them a few times live, and he was the voice of, with his very unique voice, mind you, throughout the whole career. And of course it made a big impact on me already in the 90s when I heard for the band for the first time. Especially Slaughter of the Soul really blew my mind, being one of those 10 out of 10 albums. And Lindberg's very, very strong, hateful type of vocals really was wow, outstanding, something totally different. But even before his more known style in At the Gates, he also proved that he could do some proper, more generic but powerful death metal vocals in the early years of At the Gates. Just listen to something like Gardens of Grief and you will totally understand what I'm talking about. And of course, his career had more than just At the Gates. Not that it's not enough, but I mean, he was a very, very talented individual and a great vocal performance both on albums and live. Like I said, seen them a few times live, listened to all the albums, actually made the retrospective video about their music, their career, already what it was a year or two ago. And I once even briefly met him. Unfortunately, didn't get to interview him, back in the days when I did my At the Gates interview. So, yeah, it's indeed some tragic news. Now, this was already a few days ago, so I'm doing this obviously a little bit later than a lot of news outlets, but then again, I didn't want to just, focus on himself, because there were other news, and some of them went under the radar for a lot of media, or they didn't simply care because they were not that interested. Big names and whatsoever, but I wanted to talk about, because now it seems like we're living a certain era when these kind of things are more in common, and I kind of want to make this as a wake-up call in a way. Now, to make my point here, I mean, we're not talking about the Ozzy Osbourne, the great artist. He was old character already, and with all his legacy and all that stuff, I mean, it was to be expected with that age and all, passing way beyond 70 years old marker. But obviously that made waves when that finally happened. I say finally because, he wasn't a guy in the 40s or 50s. But, obviously tragic news as well. But it gets tragical even more so when we're talking about, in this Lindbergh's case, people of 50 plus, barely. Also, in late August, Sacramentum vocalist Nisse Carlin decided to, get out of this world. Unfortunately, that is, these things happen. And that was posted on Sacramentum Facebook page that he has passed away through his own hands, with mental struggles and whatnot. Now, to add injury to this whole thing, I recently learned that the original Shining vocalist, Robert Amir Alden, I'm not exactly sure if he was the really original, but early vocalist of Shining anyway, also passed away in August, guy in his 40s. And on top of that, we lost Jürgen Bartsch of famous German band Bethlehem. Now, he was a little bit older, over 60, but nonetheless, man, still capable of doing things, obviously. So we're not talking about some elderly people leaving this planet. And he was known for, big part of Bethlehem's soul already from the 90s, doing a lot of instruments, as you can pretty much see here. Now, this is just to showcase something that happened very, very in a short amount of time. And losing people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who have, paved the way with their own respective bands, the whole career of their given styles and all, it feels kind of alarming. I mean, after all, we've lost in recent years people like L.G. Petrov of Entombed fame and all that stuff. And I mean, we still remember people of my age and younger too, I guess, how we lost, people like Dimebag Darrell of Pantera, or his brother, for that matter, Gorton of Bathory, Chuck Schuldiner of Death, and so forth. What I'm saying here is that as immortal it seems sometimes, that our heroes are right there, ready to record a new album, ready to tour some more, make more gigs, make memorable moments, and, keep the legacy going on. Sometimes it means end of an era, when that person suddenly dies because of illness, because of, suicide or whatever. It gets like to stop the whole moment, And sometimes whole bands end because of that. Gorton is a grand example how Bathory stopped with, Gorton passing away. After all, it was his band, and he was the soul of the band, and with him being dead, there was no way going on with the given band. Obviously, same fashion, when Dimebag Darrell and his brother, when they passed away, obviously it was seen like Pantera was no more. Now Pantera is back in a different form, but it's not exactly the same thing anymore. We could say the same thing happened when Jeff Hanneman of Slayer passed away, and suddenly Pantera was no more, really. I mean, obviously you had this Gary Holt from Exodus to fill in and all, but, it doesn't feel the same. So certain bands go out of business right after the key member is gone, and some bands keep going on. Can't really judge or take notes on that more than that. I don't want to be judgmental here, because obviously each and every band is more than just one member, with the exception of Chuck Schuldiner and Gorton obviously being the cores of the bands. And then we had like bands like Bolt Thrower showing the towel in when their ex-drummer, unfortunately once again passed away too early, too young. And that was the end of it. There was no Bolt Thrower anymore. So what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes death comes as a big surprise. And it can be very shocking to a lot of fans when you just see your heroes gone. Sometimes they're accidents. Sometimes it's illness, and you can kind of expect something nasty to happen. And sometimes things go by their own hands, which is even more tragic, because then you feel like you could have done something more than what it was with illness, or, in case of accidents like car crash or plane crash, whatever. And it always kind of feels so wrong in a way, when young people, and I still consider people in their 50s relatively, I'm 50, I feel great and all that stuff, but who knows, I could just die like that, you never know. And it feels so wrong in a sense that you feel like these guys could have been, making so much more art, giving so much more meaningful stuff to the world. But sometimes these people are just taken away, and it feels more tragic than some random nobody, because these people were touching the lives of thousands and thousands, maybe even millions of people worldwide. Now, I don't want to make this overly sentimental because that's just not me, but it's always kind of like a wake-up call when you lose something like Tomas Lindberg, who you would have some kind of a, not knowing the man in person, but you have a personal connection. I mean, obviously, when we lost Ozzy, it touched millions and millions of people because of Black Sabbath was so important and fundamental band. Same thing when Lemmy passed away with Motorhead and all, and the other members, of course. So these are always very, very tragic stories to those in a very close by, the family and close friends and all that stuff. But with people who are some kind of celebrities and who have made this kind of a big, important art, it's gonna touch them, big time. So I wouldn't be really surprised if there was like some, cries and tears and all that stuff taking place. After all, we're human beings. Some are more sentimental, some are with more emotions than that. But, feels weird to talk about in this sense. After all, we're dealing with the very extreme metal, black metal and death metal, always revolving around death as well as life and these stories. And when you get the more kind of a cold scientific, angle to this, the colder and more cynical it becomes. I don't want to be this guy here because, like I said, these feel very important things. We're losing important lives here, and it feels always so wrong. But in the other side of story, I want to also talk about like this is the wake up call in the sense that whenever you have a possibility to support the band that is still well and alive, touring and taking their turns to do gigs and making music, I always say, don't wait for the next turn. Don't wait for the next tour. Jump on it and go and see those bands live, because sometimes it just might be too late. This applies to, good friends too. Don't just wait to call or message them like, I'm going to do it next week or next month or next year or whatever, only to find out that this person is dead because of this and that. So while death is not the end of things, except for the given individual, it always kind of puts the life on pause and makes you think for a while, what have you achieved? What you could have done more? And have you, stayed in contact with the important people? Have you been there once you had the possibility? So rest in peace to these great artists who gave their soul, time, money, everything to make their art, and who dedicated their life to music, and feels very important in my opinion. Their legacy will forever reign on as long as there is mankind. But the rest of us, we have to just keep on moving, or like Freddie Mercury once upon a time said that the show must go on. I think that's pretty much the whole story here. The world doesn't stop revolving. The world doesn't stop moving on despite of these tragic deaths. So I don't have a beer here. I cannot really raise my mug to these heroes of sorts, but I will do it later on and keep on listening to music. Keep on seeing these guys on stage, live, all that stuff, and keep making music. New generation needs to take place when the old heroes are gone. Now, off you go, and cheers.